Hey guys, Garrett here, and today we're going to discuss how to subdivide land. Specifically, we're going to talk about platting for a residential subdivision. There's a lot that goes into this, but you do not have to do this alone. And realistically, I'm going to tell you, you basically want to hire this out. This doesn't mean that you're not going to have any input into this or into the decision making of this. You're still going to be heavily involved with it, but it's not something that you can really do on your own. Remember, anything that I talk about with this is going to be very specific to my county, so Sedgwick County within Kansas. Now, everywhere is going to be different, or they're going to have little nuances, that sort of thing. And especially if you get to, say, California, which is heavily regulated, or New York, subdividing is going to be very, very tough, and it's going to be years in the making. But in my area, it doesn't take that terribly long. I have done it twice now. I have two different subdivisions, and the first one actually took over a year, but there was a problem with a survey that was done. It was actually a problem with an angle that got screwed up way back in either the 70s or the 80s. An attorney was recording the information for my property and got an angle wrong. And while this may not sound like a big deal, it's been passed down like this forever, and it was finally caught at the time that I was platting my land. So it took a long time to get all that figured out, how to make it right again, and that can be something that you run into. So title companies, them doing their job, having title insurance on the property is very important. It ended up not costing me anything to fix this problem because I had title insurance. But if I hadn't had title insurance, I'd have had to get attorneys and title companies involved, and it would have cost me a bunch of money. But my second development took less than 6 months to get done. And that's in the days of COVID. Normally it would take 3 to 4 months to get done, and that was a pretty straightforward deal. So be realistic in your timeline of subdividing your land. Now let's run some scenarios here. Let's say you have 80 acres and you want to make 4 lots out of it of 20 acres apiece. Well, in my area, you can subdivide down to 20 acres without having to plat your land. This means all I have to do is go to the title company, have my description in hand, and basically they'll break it out into the pieces that I want it to be. So as long as it's at least 20 acres, it's not a big deal. But the second that I go under 20 acres, then I have to plat that land. And for this latest subdivision, I wanted to make 5-acre lots or thereabouts. So my subdivision, it was 40 acres that was divided down into 6 lots. So they range from 4.65 acres all the way up to 8 acres. So let's say you're subdividing land. Well, first thing you're going to need to know is, how is it zoned? Is it zoned correctly for what you're wanting to do? And you're going to have to probably look on your county's GIS website to be able to find what the current zoning is. And then you're going to have to find the zoning regulations within your county to know what you can and cannot do in that. Depending how it is zoned up front, you may not have to change zoning, but if you do, it's going to get complicated, it's going to take a lot longer, and it could get contentious. So my thought on the thing is, hopefully the zoning is correct, or you can work within that zoning parameter to get what you want out of this. But like I said, the zoning regulations are going to be on that county website. Here are my zoning regulations. Mine was rural residential, and therefore I can only knock these lots down to 2 acres apiece, or if I want to have a lagoon, it has to be a minimum of 4.5 acres. It also gives all of the setbacks, so that'd be from the front, the sides, as well as the back, the building setbacks associated with it. It tells me what I can and cannot do on that land, and gives me a blueprint to work within. But if I was wanting a much more densely populated subdivision, I would have to change that zoning. And that's not something I know how to do. I've never actually gone through that process, so I'm no expert on that. I would hire that done. But as long as your zoning is correct, the next step is to move on to platting. And you're going to require a licensed land surveyor, and you're going to need a licensed engineer to do all of the stormwater calculations with this as well. So your best bet is going to be hiring a company that has both a licensed engineer as well as a licensed land surveyor. The nice thing about doing that is they've done this process before. They have all of the contacts needed. They have the knowledge of the different zoning techniques and the setbacks and the requirements, and they know the individual personalities within the government so that they know, this guy, he's a lot more stringent on these things, but this person isn't over here. So they know who to talk to. In the subdividing game, relationships are very, very important. And the more relationships that there are from the beginning, the better off you're going to be. And of course, you, like me, aren't going to have those relationships, but the firm that you hire probably will. And they'll be able to work through those issues far faster than you could. That's not to say that you can't be involved with this. You can. You can attend all of the neighborhood meetings and the subcommittees and the council meetings. But if this becomes a contentious issue, your firm is going to have a better chance of knowing what to say correctly than you probably will. So again, hire this done. Let's get into the subdivision specifics. So there's a lot that you're going to have to think about. Of course, one of the things is floodplain. You want to make sure that you're not in the floodplain. But if you are in the floodplain and you want that area to be out of it, it means that you're going to have to do a bunch of fill. And if you do a bunch of fill and you want to be considered out of the floodplain, well, then you're going to have to go through all the regulatory channels to get through that, including the Army Corps of Engineers. But let's say you don't have any floodplain issues and you don't have any zoning issues, and this is a pretty straightforward build. What do you have to think about? Well, number one, you have to think about all of the infrastructure associated with that property or near that property. When you buy that property, first thing you should do is talk to everybody that provides some sort of a service out there. It could be AT&T, it could be Cox Cable, it could be whoever's electric, gas, water, sewer. See what's out there. Call all of them and see if they are out there, how far away are they, and what do they charge to extend to your area. Much of what you find in this step is going to dictate how that entire subdivision is laid out. Don't forget to call the oil and gas pipeline companies as well, because it's possible that there's one going right through your property. Also, find out, are there any oil rights for that property and who owns those oil rights and what kind of access do they need to get to that. The big thing here is once you know all of your utilities, then you know where they're coming from, how big they are. Everything can be sized within your subdivision, and of course within the plat you can put all of the necessary easements in place right up front. It saves a lot of time if you can get them in your plat versus having to do them later on. And if you're wondering what a plat is, it's basically just a document that has topography, it has your lots laid out, it shows where your storm sewer is going to be, where your roadways are going to be, where your easements are going to be. It may show the property setbacks necessary for your subdivision. It's going to have a lot of information within it, and it's going to be required for you to put a bunch of houses out there. Here's a picture of my subdivision, and obviously it's a very simple one. It has the lots and it has the easements and the property lines and everything associated with it. But if you look at this one, it's a lot more complicated. There's a lot going on here, and of course the lots are a lot smaller as well. I mentioned earlier that you'll probably need a professional engineer with this as well, and that's to do the drainage study as well as put together the master drainage plan for this subdivision. In my case, I just had 2 ponds with some riprap, but it can get a heck of a lot more complicated than that. This is a very important document, and this document, this drainage plan, is going to survive forever with this subdivision that you have. And so anytime that a house is being built, you got to make sure that none of the dirt that comes out for the foundation or the basement gets put into these drainage ways. But drainage issues can be a huge deal, especially when someone doesn't abide by that drainage plan. It can back up basements and cause huge flooding problems. So drainage, stick to it. There's a reason, there's a plan for it. During the planning process, you're also going to have to do some tests, and one of them is going to be a soil percolation test. And a person from the county is probably going to come out. In my case, I had to dig a big old hole 10 feet down to figure out what is the soil that's there, and they're going to run a percolation test, or they're just going to look at it. They know, they can see it, especially in my area. It's very clay, so things don't percolate very well. And a percolation test just measures how much water can flow through a soil, and the higher the number, the better the percolation. The lower the number, the worse the percolation. And therefore, it tells you what kind of sewer you're going to be if there is no sanitary sewer nearby. So if it's a very very high percolation, it means that you can use a septic system. But in my case, you can't do that. You're either stuck with a lagoon or an alternative sewer system, and those alternative sewer systems are about triple what a lagoon costs. However, if you go with an alternative system, I could break those lots all the way down to 2 acres. Whereas with a lagoon, I have to keep them at 4.5 or larger. Your zoning regulations are going to say what your building setbacks are going to be, and that's most likely what's going to be on your plat as well. Does your subdivision require a sidewalk? Is it going to be in the front, or is there going to be a sidewalk going around a detention pond? Is that detention pond going to be owned by that lot that it is adjacent to, or is it going to be a part of basically a reserve that is set back for the homeowners association? Is your subdivision going to have roads? And if it does it have curb and gutter, or does it have bar ditches? These are things you're going to need to know up front. Is it going to have a bunch of storm sewer because of the curb and gutter? Just remember, everything that goes into this gets expensive, and even if it's not being paid for by you directly, say you are using special assessments, your area does special assessments that actually cover the cost of that, and then it gets assessed back on the taxes every single year, the property taxes of that lot owner, and they pay it off over time. Well, just remember, the higher that those special assessments are, the lower the price you can get for your lot. You're always trying to get the best bang for the buck. So how many lots can you get in a specific area with the least amount of infrastructure that you have to put in place? Because that's what's going to give you, the developer, the most gain on the end of this. The more complicated that you make this, the more expensive that it can be, and the longer it can take to actually break even on this. There can be big gains down the road, but if your market turns in the middle of this, you can get upside down very quickly. Everything I've discussed today is not necessarily going to get you through the platting process, but it's things that I want you to be able to answer whenever the company that you hired to do this comes asking. You need to know these answers to these questions. And remember, every time that they come asking, they are billing you for this. So the more you know up front, the cheaper the whole process is going to be and the faster it's going to go. But let them do their job. They are good at this. They have the relationships in place, and you're paying them good money to do this. Be as supportive and as responsive as you possibly can be during this process, and it'll get done in a very reasonable amount of time. Unless, of course, you're in California, where it could take you a decade or more to get something done. Yay, Midwest! Thank you guys for watching. Make sure to hit that like button down below, as well as subscribe. I'll see you next time.